What's up, boys and girls? So, I'm taping this today, Friday, October the 9th. Yeah, the 9th. So, you guys will be in school on Monday, so this is going to be your lesson for Monday. So, next week, when you guys come to school face to face, we're going to do some note sheets and we're going to talk about the winds and we're going to discuss the three columns of global winds, the prevailing westerlies, the trade winds, and also the polar easterlies. And we're going to talk about what type of wind they are, where do they blow from, what type of air do they deliver, what kind of things do they influence, what do they do, basically. They do serve a purpose. But since we're on that and we're kind of transitioning over to fronts, which are really, really confusing in some ways, we're going to start talking about masses, okay? And when I say the word mass, M-A-S-S, mass means something that the size of something, okay? So how much matter is inside of that mass, okay? So some people might tell you, hey, you have a massive head, you have a massive house, your dog is massive. So mass means big, okay? Obviously, huge. And we're going to talk about mass and weight. Mass, when we start talking about forces in motion, is going to be a little bit different than what we're talking about now, because we're talking about moving air. And as you know, you can't grab air, right? So this is going to be a little confusing. But everything that happens during weather, boys and girls, happens because of air moving. Hot air and cold air moving from place to place. And this causes volatility, which means they don't like one another. Once hot and cold air start mixing together, things begin to happen as far as causing inclement weather, such as snowing, raining, thunderstorms, hurricanes, tornadoes. All these things are influenced by huge masses of air. Well, these are two right here, and this word jet stream, we're going to get to that. That's another confusing little concept, but here's a warm air mass and here's a cold air mass. And if you think about it, here we are right here, that's North Carolina. So why would the warm air mass be on the bottom and the cold air mass be up top? Why is that? Well, it's really easy to understand. Air masses are going to come from the place where they're the most like, right? So if you're way up at the North Pole, the North Pole doesn't make any hot air. Why? Why doesn't the North Pole make any hot air? Well, the North Pole doesn't get as much sun as the equator, so it's in darkness a lot more. So it doesn't get as hot. So it produces cold air. So cold air masses move from the north, okay? And they can be big, they can be small. Some, they're weak, they're powerful. They're kind of like people, People come in all different types, Big, small, weak, little, strong. Well, these air masses can all be very different. And you don't know if the cold air mass is going to be stronger than the warm air mass, so on and so forth. So if you look down here, the warm air mass, we know that imaginary line right down here is the equator. The equator is going to produce a lot of heat. Why does it produce a lot of heat? Well, because it gets blasted by the sun all the time. And when it gets blasted by the sun all the time, just like we talked about, there's going to be a lot of heat. And that's where all the warm air masses kind of start from, is down at the equator. Now, if you were to flip this and we went to the southern hemisphere, it'd be totally the opposite. The warm air masses would come from the north because you're talking about down below the equator, and the cold air masses would come from the south. So it's the exact opposite, just like the seasons we talked about. Well, these cold air and these warm air masses, they generally fight all the time. They're not fighting with fists, but they're fighting with their air masses to try to move each other out of the way. So now we've got a lot of cold air masses trying to make their way down to North Carolina because we're going into fall, right? So we're starting to get our temperatures starting to go down a little bit. So we got a lot of weather going through. There's going to be raining a lot. It's going to be windy a lot, and that's because we're changing the seasons. Okay, so this month you'll probably see some rain and things like that. But all of this weather is brought to you by something called a front, F-R-O-N-T. All right, so there's all kinds of fronts. There's cold fronts, there's warm fronts, there's stationary fronts, there's occluded fronts. Those are just the four we're going to learn, okay? But there's a lot of them. And basically what they do is they change the weather. Fronts, when they come through, they always change the weather because they're usually an air mass. So if a cold front's coming through, it's bringing a bunch of cold air, and the cold air is going to obviously come through and hit hot air, and then weather begins to happen. The same thing happens with hot air. Warm fronts come through, and warm fronts come through and they hit cold air. Obviously, something starts to happen and we have inclement weather. So fronts are going to be something that change the weather drastically. So I'm going to start trying to go over those this week. That means this first week of face-to-face school. All the while we're going to be taking notes on the winds, because you guys have got to know those winds. I know that I've gone over them, but you know, it's always good to listen to something 2 or 3 times so that you can remember it, because I am going to test you on this stuff. So we're going to talk more about this coming on Tuesday. All right, so this is going to be your lesson for Monday. But this will be Tuesday. We're going to start talking about fronts. And fronts are all about air masses. These gigantic masses of air. And I'm not talking about gigantic like the size of Wilmington. I'm talking about gigantic like the size of the United States, the size of Canada. These are huge air masses. And they can come in all different kinds of temperatures. You can say hot, cold, warm, frigid, Arctic, tropical. There's all kinds of air masses. So we're going to touch base with a bunch of those next week. But I hope you have a good Monday. And some of you guys just came to school today. And I'll see some of you guys Thursday. All right. So I hope you have a great day. And I'll talk to you later.